Hello and welcome to the video. This is a video talking about how to set up the more complicated planes, usually things like scale planes that have lots of additional features like gear, bomb drops, lights, all kind of stuff on your OpenTX radio. Now this is the new ME109 from Hobby King. It's a plane that I'm currently doing and setting up, and I did a video a while ago where I actually did a setup for OpenTX on a plane, but that was very much the simple way of doing it. And that was simple because what you did was set it up on the radio itself, then you connected everything up on the model, and then you just dialed in using the bits and pieces on the radio to get the position of all the control surfaces right, to make sure that the throws were correct, and do everything like that as well. Now the challenge that I have when I'm setting up these kind of planes where they have these more sophisticated functions, particularly when there are scale features, is there is a danger of overdriving the servo, and some of the flap mechanisms on some of these scale planes only want to go one way. If you try to push them the other way, they're actually going to snap things off and damage the model itself. So you want to be really careful. And also things like setting up bomb drop mechanisms where servos have to be in two discrete positions to actually catch hold of and then drop the bomb can also be a bit of a pain in the butt too. So in this video I'm going to show you how I actually set these planes up, because as I've just been doing the setup on this plane, it dawned on me I've never actually explained this on the channel. So facepalm moment, let me do this now. Now the trick to this is to actually use a little servo checker. Now this was something that I talked about in my Christmas present ideas video back in December in 2017, and I talked about it being a very useful thing to have. And it's useful for two reasons really. One, whenever you're putting a plane like this together, I always like to plug all the servo leads into a servo checker and just make sure that all the servos in all of the arms are working fine before I go any further. It also lets me check that the middle position of the servos, i.e. the servo horns, have been actually connected at the right position. Some of the cheaper models I've had, that hasn't been the case. And it also allows you to do this really neat trick, so you can do all the hard work as you're building the model, and then it just is a piece of cake to add everything onto the radio. So let me show you how I'm going to first of all figure out what all the servo limits and positions are on this model, so I can set it all up on the radio and it will be right from the very first time I plug everything in. Now I've got a piece of paper here that I'm going to write everything down on. Servo, I'm going to name them, the minimum, max and the middle positions. The first one we'll do is the bomb drop. So I've got the bomb drop servo plugged into my servo checker, powered from a battery eliminator circuit. And I'm just going to twist the number until the bomb drops off. There we go. So I know that the bomb drop happens around 1512-ish. Let me just put the bomb back on. Let me give the control a squeeze. So it's locking at about 1878. If I twiddle that back down again to around that 1520 position, I'm trying to do it in a way where you can actually see the kind of what I'm actually up to here. If I twiddle this back down, it drops off roughly about the same position. So if I about 1550 should give me a bomb drop, and about 18 odd should give me when the bomb is safe. So let's just write that down. So it drops at about 15, let's call it 1550 for sake of argument, and it is locked at about, let's call it 1800. So that's the first piece done. Great. Okay, let's unplug this servo from the servo checker, and it is important of course that you're using a servo checker with these nice big numbers on, because if you're not, then you're not going to be able to read the numbers off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the controls in turn. Now this ME109 has lots of things out on the wing. We have the gear, we have the flaps, we have lights, we even have the ailerons too. Luckily they very carefully marked up every single one of the connectors, which is brilliant. A lot of models don't do that, and this is also a way for you to figure that out. So now I'm just moving this around. This is obviously the aileron control, and what I'm doing is I'm moving it to the limits, and what you're doing is trying to move it just to the point before you can hear the servo starting to bind, because that's the physical limit of how far the servo will travel, and you never want the radio to try and move the servo past that point. So let's just make a note of what I'm finding here. So this time we're doing the aileron. The middle position where it's in line with the wings is about 1453. So it's very close to the 1500 that it is naturally. It kind of goes quite far down. So 973 is the minimum position. maximum position, quite a big throw on this, is about 1866. Okay, so that's my aileron done. Let's plug the next one in. Next one here is the flaps. Now this is one that I always very careful of. Flaps in particular on scale planes like this tend to unlike a very limited range of movement, so let's just see what we can get away with. So in the upright position, and again we're trying to get it so that the flaps are up but the servo isn't complaining and buzzing. So let's put this one on here, flaps. Yeah, about 1790, 1794. So in the up position, wants to be about 1794. And in the down position, let me just give it a twiddle to see where looks right for scale and also what works well. Yeah, that'll work. About 1185-ish. So next one then is going to be the gear. So I'm sure you're getting the hang of this by now. What we're going to do is plug the gear into the servo checker. And we're going to just twiddle the numbers until the gear rises. It's rising about 1900. It's coming out at below about 1200. So gear is up in the body above, so it seems to be about 1800. So let's say up at 1900 to give us a nice wide margin. And where does it drop? Drops about 1200. So let's set it as 1100 in the down position. Next thing we need to do, let's get the body of the plane, and this is great to do before you actually start putting the plane together for a couple of reasons, but main one is that if you find any servos that are damaged, you'll find them before you get too much forward. And the second is it's great in situations like this to be able to visually confirm that the servos are at their 90-degree position, because you want equal throw in each direction. Now you can change this after the fact and tweak it, but by default I would say equal throw is where you want to be. So once we've got that 90-degree set, then the next thing to do is mechanically set the control surface at the back of the plane. There usually is one of two ways to do this. First of all is just screw in and adjust the little control rod that's going to snap onto the control surface itself. There's usually some kind of adjustment on there, usually by screwing it clockwise will make the rod shorter, unscrewing it anti-clockwise will make the rod longer. That's a slightly tedious process. Or on some models, and this one is one of those, the way that the control rod fits onto the servo itself is actually quite nice, and there's a little Allen key in with the kit, and what you do is you just connect the control rod onto the surface at the back, undo the connector on top of the servo, slide the control surface so it's in line with the plane and perfectly level, and then just nip up the little connector on top of the servo itself and everything will line up. Once we've done that, we can again check the minimum and maximum ranges on the model just like we did before. So now we're going to end up with a sheet of paper that's got all of the information on about all of the maximum movements that the plane is happy with, where the bomb drops, where the gear needs to be in line with the wing, and these numbers need to be put into the radio as part of the model setup. So let's do that now, because this is now our Bible for this model and how everything needs to be set up. Now we might need a little bit of trimming when we actually go back and recheck everything, but all we're going to do is we're going to put each of these numbers, so bomb, aileron, flaps, gear, rudder, elevator, throttle, into the model itself. And this isn't something that I've shown before, but the way you do this is actually in the servo menu. So first of all, let's create a standard model, a good old plane model with nothing particular exotic in it. So we're going to find a spare memory, we're going to create model, select airplane, and then accept all of the defaults, making sure that we're saying yes to things like ailerons on a single channel, and we're saying yes to things like flaps too. Now what I normally do at this point is add in a little bit of expo into the main controls. As this is a warbird, they're usually built for maneuverability and speed, and they have some very scale handling sometimes. So I'm going to add a little bit of expo onto the three main controls, and we'll put about 25% expo on the aileron and the elevator, and I'll put about 15% expo on the rudder. That should just make this guy a little bit easier to fly and to maiden for the first time. So now we've done that, the next thing to do is to add all of the additional controls that we need that OpenTX hasn't already added by default. So if I click page again and go into the mixer menu, we can see we have the throttle, elevator, aileron and rudder are the first 4 controls, and it's also added to channel 6 the flaps as well. But we need an extra couple of things. We need one for the gear, and we also need one for the bomb drop too. So I need to add those 2 additional controls. So I'm just going to press and hold enter on one of the spare channels. I'm going to then give the mix a name. Always give your lines a name, because once you've got a number of models on your radio, trying to keep track of what each one is doing is a pain in the butt. So let's call this one gear, and then pop it on a switch that's going to work for me. Again, what you really want to be doing here is, we'll play with it at the end, but making sure that the default switch positions on the radio, when the switches are all back to you so it powers up without an error, are the ones that you want for the defaults. So things like gear, so for example, I like to have gear down, and for things like bomb drops, I like to have the bombs in the secure position. So when it powers up, it doesn't immediately drop all the bombs, but we'll look at that in a sec. Next one is going to be the bomb drop. Let me pop that on here. I'm going to add this onto the momentary switch on the shoulder. Again, you can do all of this through Companion, and you can do all of this through the menus on things like the X10, the QX7, all of those. This is very standard stuff for OpenTX. Again, if you haven't watched any of the other OpenTX setup videos, there's an entire series called the OpenTX Mix School. If you go and have a look at that, it'll explain it in a little bit more detail. Now, I've actually managed to get 2 things on the same switch. When you start using the radio for a lot of planes, you'll tend to find that you'll naturally go to switches for specific functions. Once you have a schema that you like, try and stick to it, and that way whenever you fly a plane, if you want to drop the flaps for example, then you'll always be going to the same switch. Right, so now we've got that, there are our 7 outputs, so we're going to need an X8R for this. And now this is the screen, the output screen, we're going to spend a bit of time in, because what we're going to do is we're going to transpose all of those numbers into the screen here so that we never overdrive the servos on the model, and we are going to be safe to plug it in, and we're not going to have any issues. So channel 2 is the aileron. So let me just get the piece of paper, because we're going to set up the subtrim, the minimum and the maximum movement, and we know what those are already. So the aileron minimum is 973 and the maximum is 1866. The middle position needs to be 1453. So let's do that first using the subtrim. You'll notice at the very top there's a little number, so it currently says 501. We want to change the subtrim till we get that number that was just on the paper. So let me just change that. It's pretty close to 1500, so I'm not going to need a massive adjustment here to get it spot on. And now what we need to do is set the minimum and maximum to the right value. Now by default it's showing us the middle channel value. I actually have to move the control I'm interested in to see what the radio is going to be sending out. So you can see that it's going from just under 1000 to about 2012, which is way too much for what we need here. So we can change both the minimum and the maximum numbers in this output screen for channel 2, which is the aileron, and then it'll only go to the levels that we need. And again, the minimum is going to be 973, the maximum is going to be 1866. So let's just edit the minimum first of all, and we'll start editing it. Now I actually have to try and go more than minus 100 to get to the value that I need for this to work on this particular model, and it won't work. So if this is the case, then what you need to do is we need to go into the model setup and turn on something so that we can go above and beyond plus and minus 100%. So let me just exit out of here. We will go back to the main model screen. You'll find something called extended limit. By default it's turned off. Turn that on, and that extended limits will allow us to go beyond 100%. This is really handy on planes in particular, just to make sure you can get the servo movement that you need for the control. So this time, now we've got that done, we'll put the control over to the side we need. We will adjust it so we get that 9.7 something. So let me just go to that 978-ish. Go to the other side. You see that's 2012. That's way too much. So let's select the maximum number and just roll that down a little bit. Again, we're watching that number to make sure it's going to match the number on the piece of paper. And there we have it set. So now the middle value is about 1453. It goes down to about 978-ish, something like that. And it goes all the way up to about 1866, which is what is on the bit of paper. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just work my way through this list. So the next one's going to be elevator. So again, we'll go back, select channel 3. We're going to go down and select the sub trim. By default, it's giving around about 1500 microseconds as the pulse width. We don't want that. For the elevator, we want a middle position of 1493. So we're going to put that in, and then we'll adjust the minimum and maximum numbers to match the paper. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these in turn. I think you've got the hang of this already. Join me in a second when I've put it all in. So here we are, all in the radio. So I've just gone through and followed this and popped in every single piece. At the moment, I'm not worried about channel direction. I'm just making sure that it's all the right way. Now I have, as a little aid for me, added the first letter of each of the channels. I wish OpenTX did this by default. So the outputs, I can see that channel 1, I'm going to plug the throttle. Channel 2 is going to be the aileron, etc. all the way down to the bomb release, which is the very bottom position. So now we've done that, we've done the lion's share of the setup for this particular plane. So the next thing we need to do is, now we've got that set up, is bind a receiver to the radio so that we can actually plug everything into the plane. So we're just going to go through the standard bind settings here. Going to set it up on D16. At the moment, I'm not worried about failsafes. I want to do those once I've checked that everything is working okay. Checking the failsafes is one of the last things you do, and resetting them before you go and fly. And then if you do any trimming on your first flight, then I would also redo your failsafes as well. So let's just bind this to the radio and then take it onto the bench and start wiring and plugging everything in. So here we are, here's the ME109, that's the receiver that we've just bound. We can start plugging it all together. Now there's a whole mess of wires in here, and normally you just start kind of blindly plugging things in and hoping for the best. But because we've already done the prep, this is going to be easy. Now we need to unplug the battery eliminator circuit from the servo tester that we already used. We're going to power the servo from that rather than the actual speed controller and the main motor, because on this point I would make sure that you haven't got your prop on, we'll take that off in a second, and you haven't got your ESC plugged in. That way, if you accidentally plug something in the wrong way, you don't have an uncommanded start. So let me just come and get the radio ready. Let's go into that output or mixer screen, because that's going to tell me which is going to be plugged into which. Let me just pop this prop off. It's making me nervous having it here, even though I'm not going to plug the ESC in. And now that's off, let's start plugging everything into the receiver. So I'm going to use the actual radio screen as my crib sheet here. So the first one I'm going to plug in, and all I'm doing is I'm just reading these little labels and just plugging them into the corresponding channels. So if it's going to be rudder, that's going to be channel 4. If it's going to be the elevator, that's going to go into channel 2. If it's going to be the bomb drop, it's going to go into channel 7. And again, the really nice thing about this particular model and the way Hobby King are doing their planes at the moment is these are all really clearly labeled up. If I get a plane that hasn't got these little labels on, then as part of my setup, as I'm figuring everything out, I normally use a little gold Sharpie and just write the letter on the servo connector, and that makes this bit really easy and straightforward. Once everything is plugged in and matches with the output numbers on the radio and how we've set up the outputs, we can plug this thing in for the first time and just see how well we got all the controls right. So I'm going to plug the battery in where the radio is on. There we are fired up. Okay, now the next thing we're going to need to do is just test a couple of things. Obviously works, so does the bomb drop, so that's really good news. So that's obviously plugged in the right way. The ailerons are working as well, they're just off screen. Interestingly, they are the wrong way around, but we'll do all the channel reversing in a second. The rudder is the wrong way around as well, but moving. And the elevator is backwards too. That's just the look of the draw, so we're going to have to reverse those channels, and we'll do that in a second. Interestingly, the flaps are not moving at all, and that's because I've made the classic mistake here. I'd love to say that I did it for the video, but you know what? Sometimes you're so worried about which servo output to plug everything into, you make the schoolboy error. And the schoolboy error in this point is that I actually plugged in the servos for the flaps upside down. So rather than them being the right way up, they're upside down. So quick inspection of the receiver. There it is. Silly boy. So turn that the right way around, plug that back in. Again, doing all of this without power applied, and then you won't get into trouble. And now when we plug the power back in, we should see that the flaps are going to work. Just make sure that wire is out the way. In fact, pop the battery on the top so that nothing's getting caught in between the control surfaces. And now the flaps work. We probably need to put a bit of a slow function on that. It doesn't look very scaled, but they're working perfectly. So now the next thing to do is, because all the servos can't move past the physical limits and damage the plane, the next thing we need to do is start setting up the direction of the channels. So I would go again into the output screen, go across just to the right where it says min max, and there is the option to set the channel direction. So that's the ailerons done. Also then need to do the elevator, so that also needs to be reversed. So we'll go down, select the elevator, go down to the channel direction, change that. Cool, that's the right way around too. Rudder is the same, unfortunately. Now let me double check that. Yeah, rudder is backwards. So what we're going to have to do is the same thing. So we're going to select rudder, go down to the channel direction, just hit enter, and that will reverse it. Now that's the right way round. Fab, nearly there. Now the flaps and now the flaps are the wrong way around as well, because actually I want the flaps to be up when the channel, or the flaps to be in line with the wing when the channel's in the back position. So let's reverse that channel as well. So as I bring the switch forward, there's the flaps moving. Oh, they're right, nearly there. And you just work your way through until you've got absolutely everything sorted. Once you're happy you've got everything fixed and it's all moving in the right direction, then I would suggest that you rebind your receiver to the radio, but this time actually set the fail-safes so that in the event of a problem, all of those nice changes that you've just done are remembered by the receiver. So select each of the individual channels, just do a couple of clicks with a plus or minus button to start inputting a number. The trick here is you press and hold enter, it will just set the channel to the existing channel value that you've got set, and now we've done all that stuff on the plane. All we're just going to do is work our way down, and once we've got all of those set, rebind the receiver to the radio, and then we're good to go. Last couple of tips here. I'm now happy with this channel model, so I've renamed it ME109 and put the little picture on it as well. Also popped a timer on so I can keep track of how long I'm flying. So the last thing I would do is, if you find that the movement of the control surfaces are a little bit too much, usually the manual will tell you how far each control surface will move, then just select the control that you're interested in and use the weight on the input screen to just reduce it. And again, in here you could set up things like dual rates so that you could have the control surfaces moving very aggressively, and with a flick of a switch have the control surfaces moving an awful lot less as well. So hopefully that helps for those of you that can set these kind of planes up. I've had a number of these scale planes, and in the early days occasionally I would stress servos, I would stress pieces, particularly scale models that have things like flaps that only go so far before they go up into the wing, and they physically can't go any higher. If by accident you plug everything together and use the trial and error method, there is a chance that you're going to overdrive a servo or try and push a control surface past its limit, and you're going to damage something. So hopefully that's interesting to those of you that are setting up these kind of planes. The trick is, use a servo checker as you're building the plane, make sure that everything works, double check that the middle channel position is physically as close to 90 degrees as you can possibly get it. While you're testing all the servos, write down both the middle channel value position for that 90 degree of the servo, and also check the limit of throws as well. Put all of that information using the output screen into the radio, and then when you plug everything in, you've got much less chance of you actually doing something to the model that it doesn't particularly like. Last step is once you get everything happy, it all works, make sure that you set up the failsafe, bind it to the model, and then you're ready to go out and fly. Don't forget, when you fly it for the first time and you trim the plane, most planes need a couple of clicks of trim in one direction or the other, usually to combat the roll that's induced by the spinning prop. Do your failsafe again, just so that in the event of a problem with the radio, if there's a slight hiccup, the failsafe will make sure that the plane is flying straight and level, and you won't immediately have a nasty swerve or start a barrel roll or a loop that will cause you to crash. If you found that video useful or like the content, then please hit the like and subscribe button down below. If you want to go the extra step, you can become a Patreon of the Painless 360 channel and help provide support for what I do here. All the videos created here are put into playlists, so if you're interested in a particular topic, have a look at the playlist, and they all are organised in there to make them easier to use. If you're not sure if there's a video for your particular problem or topic you want to know more about, then add Painless 360 to the Google search term that you're interested in, and that should find the video, article or content about the particular thing that you're interested in having a look at.